I still remember the day I first saw her at that small cafe in Munich. The spring air carried the scent of fresh pastries and coffee, and Liana sat there, her dark hair catching the sunlight. She was reading a book, completely absorbed, and I couldn't help but notice how she'd smile at certain passages. I gathered my courage and approached her table. My hands were sweaty, gripping my own coffee cup like a lifeline. The moment she looked up at me with those striking eyes, I knew I was done for. We talked for hours that afternoon about everything and nothing. Her laugh was infectious, and the way she spoke about her travels and dreams made my structured world seem suddenly full of possibilities. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Liana brought color into my methodical life. Where I was careful and planned, she was spontaneous and free. She'd surprise me with impromptu picnics during my lunch breaks at the engineering firm, or leave little notes in my briefcase. I found myself looking forward to every moment with her, even the quiet ones where we'd just sit together in comfortable silence. We married within a year. The wedding was perfect, a blend of traditional German customs and her more exotic tastes. I remember how radiant she looked in her dress, how her eyes sparkled when we exchanged vows. Our honeymoon in Greece was like something out of a dream, filled with sun-soaked days and starlit nights. Setting up our home together felt natural. My career was taking off, and we found a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood of Munich. Liana decorated it with an artistic flair that made it uniquely ours. When she told me she was pregnant with Anna, I thought my heart would burst with joy. Anna's birth changed everything, in the best way possible. She was such a thoughtful baby, always observing the world with those big, curious eyes. Liana took to motherhood with surprising grace, singing lullabies and creating elaborate bedtime stories. When Sophie came along 2 years later, our family felt complete. The girls were like day and night, Anna careful and contemplative, Sophie a whirlwind of energy and creativity. Those early years were filled with weekend trips to the park, family dinners where Liana would try out new recipes, and quiet evenings reading stories to the girls. I'd come home from work to find them all curled up on the couch, or in the garden where Liana would be teaching them about flowers. My engineering projects were succeeding, and each promotion meant more security for our future. We had our routines. Sunday mornings were for pancakes and cartoons. Saturdays were for family outings, the zoo, museums, or just long walks in the city. I'd watch Liana chase the girls around the playground, their laughter echoing through the air, and think about how lucky I was. This was everything I'd ever wanted. A loving wife, beautiful children, a successful career. It felt like we'd found the perfect balance. Everything changed when I landed that promotion. After years of dedication and late nights, the company recognized my potential and put me in charge of operations across 13 European countries. The salary more than doubled, opening doors I never thought possible. We moved to a beautiful house in Switzerland, complete with a view of the mountains that took my breath away every morning. The girls loved their new schools, making friends quickly despite the language barrier. The frequent travel became part of my routine. Monday mornings at the airport, Tuesday meetings in Paris, Wednesday conferences in Amsterdam. I'd return home Thursday evenings exhausted but fulfilled, ready to spend long weekends with my family. That's when I first noticed the changes in Liana. Small things at first. A coldness in her voice when I called from abroad. Expensive packages arriving at our doorstep, designer clothes, jewelry, things we'd never discussed. Our joint account showed restaurant charges for 4 or 5 people, but she'd brush off my questions with vague explanations about networking and making new friends. One evening, after returning from a business trip to Milan, I found receipts for a weekend spa retreat that cost more than our monthly mortgage. When I brought it up, her eyes flashed with an anger I'd never seen before. "You're never here anyway. What does it matter how I spend our money?" "Our money needs to support the girls' future too," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She erupted. "Don't you dare lecture me about the girls. While you're gallivanting across Europe, I'm stuck here playing mother." The first wine glass caught me off guard. It shattered against the wall behind me, red wine staining our cream wallpaper. I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. The second glass hit my shoulder, pieces scattering across the kitchen floor. "You pathetic excuse for a husband." Her words cut deeper than the glass ever could. "You think you're so much better than me with your fancy job and your perfect manners." I raised my hands, trying to calm her. "Liana, please. The girls might hear." She lunged forward, her fists pounding against my chest. I caught her wrists gently, careful not to grip too hard. She responded by kicking my shins, screaming obscenities that echoed through our perfect house. These incidents became more frequent. A plate thrown because I questioned a suspicious credit card charge. A slap across the face when I mentioned coming home late from a girls' night out. Each time I remained calm, never raising my hand in return. My size could easily hurt her. I couldn't live with that. I tried reaching out to the local police after a particularly bad episode. The officer looked at me, all 6 feet 2 inches of me, and actually smirked. "Surely you can handle your wife, sir," he said, making notes he'd probably never look at again. I left the station feeling more alone than ever. Back home, I started finding bruises in places I couldn't explain to my colleagues. Long sleeves became my standard attire, even in summer. I watched helplessly as my marriage collapsed around me, while maintaining a brave face for Anna and Sophie. Their innocent questions about why Mummy was always angry became harder to answer. Coming home between business trips always filled me with dread. That particular Wednesday, I noticed Anna and Sophie weren't running to greet me at the door like they usually did. Instead, they stayed in their room, quiet. Too quiet for a 6- and 8-year-old. I found them huddled together on Anna's bed. The moment Liana's heels clicked down the hallway, both girls flinched. Sophie grabbed her sister's hand, and Anna's eyes went wide with fear. My stomach twisted into knots. Later that night, while giving them a bath, I spotted the bruises. Dark purple marks dotted Anna's upper arms, and Sophie had similar ones on her shoulders. My hands shook as I gently touched them. "Did you fall at the playground?" Anna looked down at the bubbles, avoiding my eyes. Sophie whispered, "Mummy gets mad sometimes. She leaves us alone a lot," Anna added, her voice barely audible. "Last week we had no dinner for 2 days." The water in the tub suddenly felt ice cold. I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Mummy said you wouldn't believe us anyway." That night I confronted Liana in our bedroom. She sat at her vanity, removing her makeup with practiced strokes. "The girls told me everything." She laughed, a high-pitched sound that made my skin crawl. "And what are you going to do about it?" "I'll go to the police." "Please," she turned around, smirking. "Look at me, Oliver. I'm this tiny, sweet thing. And you?" She waved her hand dismissively. "You're just a big, dumb man who works too much. Who do you think they'll believe?" The truth in her words hit harder than any physical blow. I'd seen how people responded to her charm, how she could switch from monster to angel in seconds. The system wasn't built for cases like mine. I needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence. The next day I ordered small cameras disguised as smoke detectors and motion sensors. I installed them in the living room and kitchen while Liana was out shopping. My phone became a vault of photographs, every bruise, every scratch I found on the girls. I documented dates, times, and their explanations in a password-protected note app. "Honey," I approached Liana one evening, keeping my voice casual. "With my travel schedule and your social life, maybe we should use a shared calendar app, just to keep track of everything." She agreed easily, probably thinking it would help her alibis. Within days she was logging everything, coffee with Mark, and special client meeting at hotel filled her schedule. Each entry became another piece of evidence, another nail in the coffin she was building herself. I played my part perfectly. Supportive husband, understanding father, the fool she thought I was. Every morning I'd kiss her goodbye, wish her a good day, and die a little inside knowing what she might do to our daughters. But I kept documenting, kept gathering proof. My girls needed me to be smart, not angry. They needed me to win. The calendar notifications kept popping up on my phone. Each one twisted my stomach into knots. Party after party, strange names I'd never heard before, all while I was away on business trips. My hands shook as I checked the security footage from last Thursday night. The time stamp read 11 p.m. Music blasted through our living room. Bodies writhed on our furniture, our family couch where we used to read bedtime stories. Wine bottles littered the floor. Liana orchestrated the whole thing, directing people like some demented conductor. The worst part, I could see Anna's nightlight reflecting in the upstairs hallway. My girls were up there, probably terrified. I had to step away from my laptop. Bile rose in my throat. These weren't just wild parties, they were full-blown orgies in our family home, with our daughters just upstairs. What kind of mother? I couldn't even finish the thought. The evidence kept mounting. Calendar entries showing she'd leave for hours, sometimes days. Security footage of strangers coming and going. The girls alone, making their own meals, trying to do homework while chaos erupted below. I documented everything meticulously, my engineering background serving me well. Each file was dated, backed up, secured. Then came the message that changed everything. Liana's father had suffered a stroke. She needed to fly back home immediately. "I don't know how long I'll be gone," she said, throwing clothes into a suitcase. "You'll have to handle everything here." I kept my voice steady, casual. "The girls and I could visit my parents while you're away. Give you one less thing to worry about." She barely looked up from her packing. "Whatever. Just make sure they don't bother me with calls while I'm dealing with Papa." My lawyer had the papers ready within hours. A temporary custody agreement, carefully worded to seem routine. Just a grandfather wanting to spend time with his grandchildren while their mother dealt with a family emergency. Liana signed without reading, her mind already elsewhere. Her signature, usually so precise and controlled, was a hasty scrawl across the bottom of the page. She never even noticed the careful legal language transferring primary custody to my parents. As she rushed out the door for her flight, she didn't even say goodbye to the girls. I watched her go, knowing this might be the last time she'd have any real control over their lives. The weight of the signed papers in my briefcase felt like salvation. Looking at my lawyer across the conference table, I took a deep breath. The courtroom's sterile atmosphere matched the coldness in my chest. 6 months of preparation led to this moment. My evidence sat in neat folders before me, photographs, videos, calendar entries, medical reports for the girls. Everything meticulously organized, just like I'd been taught. Liana strutted in 15 minutes late, wearing a tight designer dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a custody hearing. She didn't even glance my way as she took her seat on the opposite side. The judge's disapproving look at her tardiness didn't seem to faze her. "I don't need a lawyer," she announced to the room. "This whole thing is ridiculous. I know my rights as a mother." My lawyer leaned over. "This works in our favor. Let her talk herself into trouble." The proceedings began with opening statements. My lawyer presented our case methodically, professionally. Then Liana stood up, launching into a dramatic speech about what a controlling husband I'd been, how I'd trapped her in an unhappy marriage. I kept my face neutral as we moved to evidence presentation. The calendar entries came first, detailed records of nights she'd abandoned the girls to party, timestamps of when she'd return home drunk at dawn. Then came the bank statements showing thousands spent at clubs while the girls needed new clothes. Liana's smirk started to fade when we played the security footage. Footage of Liana screaming at Anna for interrupting one of her gatherings. Sophie crying alone in the kitchen because no one had fed her dinner. These videos were taken without my knowledge. "That's illegal," Liana shouted, jumping up. "Mrs. Krause, please control yourself," the judge warned. The footage was obtained legally, as it was Mr. Krause's residence as well. The medical reports came next. Documentation of bruises, malnutrition, psychological trauma. The school counselor's notes about the girls' declining grades and concerning behavior. Liana's composure cracked. Her carefully maintained facade began to slip as each piece of evidence mounted against her. She tried interrupting, making accusations, but the judge shut her down repeatedly. "Your Honor, he's lying. He's manipulated everything to make me look bad." She pointed at me wildly. "He's an absent father who's never there for his children." "Mrs. Krause." The judge's voice cut through her tirade. "I have reviewed extensive evidence of Mr. Krause maintaining steady employment to support his family, while also being present for his children's activities and medical appointments. What I have not seen is evidence of your positive contribution to their well-being. In fact, the evidence suggests your presence has been actively harmful." The color drained from Liana's face. This wasn't going according to her script. She wasn't charming or manipulating her way out of this one. "These children were endangered repeatedly under your care," the judge continued. "The evidence of negligence and abuse is overwhelming. I'm frankly disgusted by your apparent lack of concern for their safety and welfare." My lawyer slid a document across the table, the final settlement agreement. Full custody to me. No child support requirements. Only supervised visitation rights for Liana. She stared at it for a long moment, hands shaking slightly. I could see the calculations running behind her eyes as reality set in. She'd lost. There would be no more manipulation, no more control. Without looking at anyone, she signed the papers. After the court proceedings, I focused on rebuilding our life together, but in the background, Reports of Liana's situation kept trickling in through mutual acquaintances and her supervised visitation coordinator. She lost her job at the marketing firm within weeks of the divorce. Her erratic behavior and frequent emotional outbursts made it impossible for her to maintain professional relationships. The expensive apartment she'd moved into quickly became unaffordable. She bounced between temporary accommodations, burning bridges with friends who tried to help her. The final blow came when her residency permit expired. Without stable employment or our marriage to anchor her status, the Swiss authorities denied her renewal application. She tried appealing the decision, but a history of domestic incidents and the custody ruling worked against her. The welfare office grew increasingly frustrated with her lack of progress in finding steady work. They gave her multiple chances, referring her to job placement programs and counseling services, but Liana's pride prevented her from following through. She'd show up late to appointments, pick fights with caseworkers, and refused to take entry-level positions she considered beneath her. Eventually, they cut off her benefits entirely. I heard she started working as a hostess at various nightclubs, living off cash tips and sleeping on colleagues' couches. The supervised visits with Anna and Sophie became sporadic, then stopped altogether. The girls would wait expectantly in the visitation center's playroom, only to be disappointed when their mother failed to show up. I couldn't dwell on Liana's downward spiral. My daughters needed stability and healing. We found a beautiful house in Munich suburbs, close to an excellent international school. The property had a large backyard where the girls could play safely, with plenty of space for a vegetable garden and a treehouse I promised to build them. My new position as engineering director at a renewable energy firm provided the flexibility we needed. I arranged my schedule to drop off and pick up the girls from school most days. We established comforting routines, homework at the kitchen table while I prepared dinner, weekend trips to the local farmers market, Sunday afternoon board games regardless of weather. Anna and Sophie's transformation was gradual but profound. The haunted look in their eyes began to fade. Anna's nightmares became less frequent. She started joining after-school clubs and making close friends. Sophie's wild tantrums subsided as she learned to trust that her needs would be consistently met. Her kindergarten teacher remarked on her growing confidence and creativity. When the girls occasionally asked about their mother, I remained neutral. Sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to work through. I'd explain gently. Your mother loves you, but right now she needs to focus on taking care of herself. I never disparaged Liana or blamed her for our family's upheaval. They would form their own understanding of events when they were ready. Instead, I concentrated on creating new memories and traditions. We converted the spare bedroom into an art studio where the girls could express themselves freely. I enrolled them in swimming lessons and watched proudly as they conquered their fear of water. During school holidays, we took short trips to explore different parts of Germany, gradually expanding their world beyond the trauma of the past. Our home became filled with the sounds I'd always dreamed of: giggling, singing, the patter of small feet, and animated conversations over meals. Seeing my daughters flourish in this environment of consistent love and support confirmed that I'd made the right choice in fighting for them. While I couldn't erase their painful memories, I could ensure their future would be built on a foundation of security and unconditional care. Life had settled into a comfortable routine with my daughters. Anna's piano lessons filled our home with music, while Sophie's growing collection of art covered our walls. The peace we'd found made Liana's next moves all the more jarring. A colleague forwarded me a link one morning. My stomach churned as I clicked through. There was Liana, scantily clad on a professional-looking website advertising escort services. Her real name, photos, even contact details brazenly displayed. I quickly closed the tab, not wanting to see more. The thought of her desperation didn't bring me satisfaction, only sadness for our daughter's sake. Reports trickled in through mutual acquaintances. She'd registered officially as an adult worker, moving between temporary accommodations. Her reviews were apparently excellent, but it pained me to think of her reduced to this. Without proper papers or work permits, her options had become severely limited. I dreaded the day our girls might discover this reality about their mother. For now, I focused on maintaining their stability, our weekend routines of farmers markets and bike rides along Lake Zurich. The calm shattered one Tuesday morning. My phone lit up with a call from Jugendamt German Youth Services. The woman on the line informed me they'd received serious allegations about my children's welfare. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady as I invited them to inspect our home immediately. 2 social workers arrived within the hour. I showed them around our apartment. Anna's sheet music organized on the piano, Sophie's art supplies neatly arranged, their rooms tidy and bright with family photos. The kitchen was stocked with healthy snacks, their school schedules posted on the fridge. The girls arrived home from school during the inspection, their faces lit up when they saw me, running over for hugs before starting their homework at the dining table. The social workers observed their comfortable interaction with me, noting their well-kept appearance and confident demeanor. "Mr. Krause," one worker said as they prepared to leave, "we find no merit to these accusations. Your daughters appear happy and very well cared for." I thanked them professionally, but inside I was seething. I knew exactly who had made those false claims. My lawyer confirmed it later. Liana had been behind the report, a desperate attempt to regain some control. That evening, I held my daughters close as we watched a movie together, grateful for the peace we'd found and determined to protect it at all costs. The call from my lawyer couldn't have come at a better time. I was sitting at the dining table, the light from the setting sun filtering through the blinds in that golden way that always makes the house feel even warmer. I'd just helped Anna with her school project. Something about volcanoes, but in truth, most of the work had ended up being me answering her non-stop questions, with nods while gluing bits of paper together. Sophie had been in her own world, sketching away something that probably involved unicorns. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd craved until it became a norm instead of the exception. I quickly excused myself when the phone buzzed, signaling it was a call I couldn't ignore. Just hearing my lawyer's voice instantly created a small knot in my stomach. It was something I couldn't control, part of me still conditioned to expect the worst after everything that had happened. But today was different. They were impressed. "Oliver," he said, the grin in his voice like a quiet ripple over the line. "In fact, I overheard one of the officials say something about how lucky your girls are to have you. Suffice it to say, Liana calling youth services backfired spectacularly." I almost snorted, my hand instinctively gripping the countertop as I leaned against it. Liana had pushed once again, but this time, her blow had weakened her case further instead of strengthening it. Irony wasn't really the word for it. My mind flashed back to the visit, the sensation of the social worker's eyes roaming the house, judging every tiny detail, feeling like I was under a microscope. I hated it, even though I knew I had nothing to hide. People don't talk about that part of parenthood, the nagging feeling that, despite doing everything you can, it might not be enough when it comes to legal battles like this. But for once, things had gone exactly the way I hoped, and this small victory, it was enough for now. I relaxed slightly, letting my shoulders drop as I ran a hand across my face. "Well, that's a relief." "It's better than a relief," my lawyer responded. "Trust me, Liana's stunt actually solidified your position. If she tries anything else moving forward, it'll look like desperation. They won't take us seriously anymore." I didn't say much after that, not because I wasn't grateful for his optimism, but because I was too focused on the sensation, the quiet triumph. It wasn't anything loud or obvious, no fist-pumping celebration or outburst of joy. That's not my style. Instead, it was this deep exhale, this recognition that all those sleepless nights, the documentation, the arguments that circled in my head, the weight of watching over my daughters, it had been worth it. Because now they were safe. Fully, completely. "I'll send over the formal report tomorrow," my lawyer added before we hung up. "Enjoy the evening with your girls. You've earned it." I stood there for a moment, just staring at the quiet house. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant giggles of Anna and Sophie from the living room, the faint scent of something Sophie must have spilled in the hallway. For a split second, I allowed myself to stand in that satisfaction, to really feel it, to embrace the weight of it on my shoulders, but knowing it was something I could finally shrug off. No more looking over my shoulder. No more playing detective in my own home. It was over. After a beat, I walked back into the living room. Anna still sat cross-legged with her school materials, but her eyes found mine the second I stepped into the room. She was always far more perceptive than people gave her credit for. She didn't ask questions, but I saw it in her eyes, the way she looked for reassurance, wanting to know things would stay as they were, that no one would come in and upset the fragile balance we'd created. I smiled softly at her before walking over to Sophie, tasseling her blonde curls lightly as she threw up her hands, showing off what she'd been drawing this time. Some magical land, complete with rainbow trees that actually had faces. I knew I'd seen half of those characters in her books. She was always borrowing ideas from her many stories, blending them into her world. "Looks good," I said, leaning down to give her a quick hug. There was comfort in it, her small, solid presence against me. She didn't need to understand every detail about what was happening, or why certain things had changed. All that mattered to her was feeling secure. That As long as I was here, everything stayed steady. I'd give anything to make sure it would. The night passed as most weeknights did, with baths and stories. Sophie falling asleep first, after demanding I read the same bedtime book we'd gone through 100 times before. Anna stayed up a bit longer, prodding me with a question here and there as I tucked her in. But eventually, even she drifted off, leaving me in the soft quiet of the house. It was strange how normal this all felt now. Months ago, I remember feeling like I was living in a constant whirlwind, unsure of where I'd land, paranoid about what Liana might do next, how I'd protect the girls from it all. Now, each routine felt like a small victory. The ordinary was a blessing. The truth was, I didn't think much about Liana anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't afford to let my life revolve around her chaos anymore. That chapter was finished. Whether she chose to get herself together or continue down the path she was on wasn't something I had control over. What mattered, what really mattered, was this: the cocoon I had crafted around Anna and Sophie, letting their bruises, the invisible and the literal, fade while we moved forward. I knew they would ask about her one day, especially Anna. She was already starting to piece things together, in her own quiet way, listening more than speaking, observing when I thought she wasn't. When the time came when she or Sophie looked at me and asked about their mother, I'd be ready. And I'd tell them the truth. Not all of it, of course. They didn't need to carry the weight of knowing every twist, every betrayal. But I wouldn't lie either. Liana was their mother, and there would be parts of her they'd have to reconcile on their own in the future. But not now. Not while they were this young, this capable of starting fresh, unburdened by the worst parts of the past. I sat there alone for a while, letting the quiet wash over me, knowing tomorrow would look pretty much the same as today, routine, predictable, normal. And for the first time in years, I was okay with that. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.